You're listening to MoveTube. This is in some ways part 3 of our New Horizons Film Festival report. New Horizons Film Festival in Wrocław, Poland, which we went to. And the final film we saw in Poland was by Mark Jenkin, the director of Bait. It was called Enys Men.
Enys Men would be the correct.
Which is the real name of a fictional island.
No, it's a fake name of a fictional island.
Yes,
but there is Enys Men in North Wales, which is Anglesey. Okay. So it's basically it's giving a Cornish twang to a Welsh.
Okay.
And
name. Basically, we want to talk about Mark Jenkin. When Bait came out in 2019, there was a feeling of enormous relief and excitement that someone from these fair isles, or from England,
Sceptred Isles,
although he may identify primarily as Cornish, we don't know, but someone from this land mass from fairly nearby had made something formally innovative, moving.
Not in the kitchen sink.
But rooted in real
social and political context.
Real social political context, exactly.
Yeah.
When I saw Bait, I saw it in the hallowed the context I saw it in was a Q&A with Mark Kermode, where he repeatedly told us that it was the best thing since sliced bread. The other Mark, the lesser Mark,
the rockabilly Mark.
But, and this is a big but, the film that he's now made, Enys Men, is not good. And we are going to very compassionately talk about the trajectory. We've also watched Bronco's House, which is a short, 45-minute short. We don't see enough 45-minute shorts.
A featurette, I think they call it.
A featurette, exactly, that he made before Bait, and which I assume helped him get towards the place of making Bait. And we're just going to talk about the various tensions at play in Mark Jenkins' career, because I feel like, he is obviously hugely talented in lots of ways.
Massively, undeniably.
And there's the potential there for something extraordinary. And it just really felt like a complete miss.
But we have to contextualize Mark Jenkin in the context of British filmmaking, British nostalgism. In the, I suppose that if we are singling out via Bait, Mark Jenkin as being a kind of spokesman for excellent English filmmaking.
Exactly.
Why does a film like Enys Men why is it revanchist in a way? A kind of regressive step, I think, in because Bait is a film that hooked us. Hooked us in.
Hook, line, and sinker.
The first
naval pun.
But it really, we're not going to do a lot of navel gazing tonight. But we need to.
Where's your boat?
We need to contextualize Mark Jenkin in the thick of contemporary British filmmaking, and also British filmmaking in the last 30, 40 years. And also I think we also need to talk about obsolescence and technological obsolescence, I think, because that's an important thing for Mark Jenkin, who is a assiduous lover of celluloid, of film.
He's an analogist, and he's also a manifesto writer. We'll talk about that more later.
Yes, we will. Well, maybe a good place to start, because we've got show notes.
Yes,
is we should start by reading, because this does inform, I think, what we're going to talk about, which is So basically, in 2012, Mark Jenkin, on the 25th of December 2012, Mark Jenkin wrote a manifesto for film, I think somewhat inspired by Dogma 95, called, and the name of this movement is Silent Landscape Dancing Grain 13. So SL,
which I have to say is a very beautiful image.
Extremely beautiful.
Very beautiful name.
Yeah. That's it. It's a really nice name.
You named it well, Mark.
So basically, his claim, and he wasn't claiming to speak for a movement, but I think he was trying to put into motion a particular attitude.
He was trying to set out his stall, which I think all good artists should have as a practice, and should clarify that.
A lot of people do. I mean, it's not
some do in manifestos. Obviously, Bresson wrote his whole book. On
notes on the cinematograph. Even Tarkovsky did with Sculpting in Time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, which was an approach towards duration and poetics. This is very much, I suppose, you put it very well, so I won't steal the words out of your mouth, but you made a very right observation about what this manifesto does, and I will read it first, and if the audience wants to realise the kind of, I suppose the I don't know, the hook through the fish's jaw, they can point it out. So there are 13 points.
Unlucky for some.
So 1, the film should be shot on small gauge film. 2, it should be presented in
Does that mean 16 mil?
Yes, 16 mil.
Not
Bolex kind of hand cranked film.
Or 8 mil.
Yeah, or 8 mil. He hasn't shot on Super 8 though, as far as I'm aware. 2, be presented in black and white.
He has, but not for these projects.
Okay. Yeah, be presented in black and white. Number 3, be shot silently and post-synchronized. The Italians would love him for that. 4, contain voiceover. 5, contain non-diegetic music. Actually, in the original version that I've got here, which is appropriately typed out on typewriter, it says contain no diegetic music. What he's actually edited it with is contain non-diegetic music, an important difference. 6, be shot with a shooting ratio no greater than 3:1. 7, be no longer than 80 minutes. 8, feature a protagonist. 9, be shot utilizing no extraneous grip equipment other than a tripod. So obviously not a kind of harness or a J-lock or a V-lock, or any kind of...
keeping it on sticks.
Keeping it on the old legs. 10, be shot utilizing only available or practical lighting. 11, be realized whilst subverting or ignoring genre constraints. Number 12, be realized with a minimum of fuss. 13, break one of the 13 SLDG 13 film manifesto rules. So your observation is that...
I can't remember what my observation was.
It was very right.
It just that the final rule that you must break one of the rules is inevitably, like you inevitably follow it, because if you follow all the rules, then you've broken one of the rules. Yeah. Which is that you must break one of the rules.
So it's a self-obliterating manifesto. So
it's very clever. But some of these rules I feel are rooted in kind of extraneous nostalgism. Other rules I think are formally useful. If it got him to where he was on Bait, I'm very happy about it, because Bait is a formally extremely well constructed film that I admire very much. But yes, the spirit in which these mostly formal constraints were written feels a little bit silly. I'm going to put it out there, and I think that gives us a bit of a bearing in terms of how we talk about Enys Men.
Do you want to intro Enys Men? Tell us what it is. Set the scene.
So Enys Men is like Bait. It's about an hour and a half. It's shot on film, this time color. It opens with a woman, sort of middle-aged woman, in a very rural location, in a cottage so remote that she has to pull a ripcord on a generator to get her electricity. This is in the 70s. We know it's the 70s partly because of the lack of 21st century technology, and partly because she's literally writing in a diary, 1973, I think. 1974. She's writing on a sort of ledger the temperature, I believe, and sort of various remarks about
scientific observations. She is on the island to observe a flower, a small clump of flowers on the cliff edge.
And it very much has the air of British people who grew up in Britain might remember the Day to Day. There's a scene with Steve Coogan, who later went on to be Alan Partridge, being a kind of a CCTV security person at a swimming pool, who reports each year the amount of deaths. He says 1989, no one died. 1990, no one died. And then it eventually gets to a year when someone did die, and he kind of concludes that his record as a security is almost unblemished, and therefore he should be rewarded, even though he allowed a death to take place. So there is this rather kind of dry I don't know to what extent humor was desired in the
I think none.
In the kind of repetitive nature of this process by which Mary Woodvine's character sort of records quite banal details about where she is. She drops a stone in a well every day and kind of listens to see how long it takes to hit the bottom and how much water there is. There are eventually murmurings of a plot. There are sort of flash forwards, similar to the flash forwards we see in Bait, although they're more
less kind of stark and less explosive than those in Bait, and we can talk about that.
There is a man who, I don't want to spoil it, but there is a man who we are led to believe will at some point or has at some point visited her. There are strange sort of pagan rituals, dances by kind of young women. There are various strange sort of ghostly omens of something happening on the island, and we are led to believe that a fisherman has visited her. She's also using like a radio ham or something and kind of communicating with someone
with the mainland.
With the mainland. There's this sort of fisherman who if you put the pieces together, she's visited by this fisherman. He comes there to fix some kind of leak, and then they fuck, and then he leaves, and then he dies in the sea or something.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a spoiler, but fucking hell, it doesn't matter. This film really is just laughable at a certain point. Like the way in which the tragedy unfolds is just so heavy-handed and so unearned that it just makes me and made Owen and our party, maybe not everyone else in the cinema because they were being more respectful, but it makes you just belly laugh.
It felt parodic in the way that maybe I think a reference point, and I think one that Mark Jenkin doesn't really deserve and wasn't sought after, was Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. But it has a similar kind of quasi-science British educational filmmaking, not in the sense of Len Lai, but a kind of British
sense of don't touch this pylon.
It has that kind of look to it because it's shot in a very rich Kodak stock. It's a very bright, vibrant, and I think we were saying, so basically what happens is the film begins off in this quite serene, I would say almost kind of a robotic structure. There's a structural conceit, which is her going and observing the flower, making observation. It turns out there's a daughter, perhaps, in the house who's a bit deranged.
Oh God, yeah, I forgot about that.
Daughter, but she plays a kind of important but completely irrelevant, plot point. Their
thing.
Interactions feel completely wooden.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is there is a breakdown, a derangement. The flowers begin to grow a kind of moss. She observes this moss.
A lichen.
When the lichen begins to grow on the flowers, it also begins to grow on a big wound that's on her stomach, a scar, and things begin to fall apart.
So there is a sense of a sort of Rosemary's Baby kind of possession style, sort of descent into
madness,
disease and madness and things being not
And what
good.
happens is we get, at that point, the structure and pace of the film changes. You get a lot more kind of erratic flashes around. You see a body floating in the bay. You see miners looking up from the mine shaft. You get these
miners with an E.
Miners with an E. You get interjections from the past. There's a priest who's delivering a kind of sermon in the field, which are obviously atavistic. It's obviously like a 19th century or 18th century figure, the way he's dressed. You get these kind of Ari Aster style pagan girls dancing and singing. The house falls visibly into disrepair, as if it's been abandoned for years.
It's a very midsummer
indeed. I think that's the problem. So it enters this period of flux, and we get the impression that a kind of tragedy occurs, and we're left to kind of assemble the pieces. And a key plot point is played by a prehistoric stone, which you can see out of her doorway when she leaves her house each morning, which is framed on the horizon, a monolith or an obelisk, if you will, which made me automatically think about Children of the Stones, that kind of weird, rogue-esque TV series that was made in the 70s, which was about, again, kind of haunted stones in the English countryside. But I think my main feeling was, you said wasn't earned. The film was gorgeously shot, fine. But when you put yourself in a beautiful location and you shoot on Kodak on a hand crank camera, it is going to look nice. I would have been amazed.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, shout out to all the cinematographers out there. Yeah. But like, it's not in. I was going to say it's not that. Like,
it's not that hard to shoot a beautiful film on a coastline.
On celluloid on a coastline, it's really not that hard to make something look beautiful.
It's going to look nice. Yeah.
And furthermore, like, it's definitely not enough unless you're making like a pure experimental film, which as we said before we were on air. I'm mad. I'm cinema crazy. I would watch like 90 minutes of like very beautiful textured sort of almost structural film. I'd watch like her just reading the temperature and doing like I'd watch like I would watch a night. We watched loads of Mekash, Jonas Mekash when we were.
You could talk about Mekash, or you could talk about Peter Hutton, or you could talk about James Benning. James
all
Benning,
kinds of structural filmmakers,
a landscape structural filmmaker.
But this wasn't. This was. I mean,
and,
fair enough. He wouldn't have got the money if he was trying to make that sort of film.
No.
But what he did was ultimately the problem is he admires the greats, and this is why I respected him after Bay. I heard the Q&A. Tarkovsky and Bresson are who he looks to. In the British film industry, you will not find, the people you talk to in the British film industry.
Ben Wheatley isn't saying I love Bresson.
Yeah. Right? But also the tastemakers, the people who make stuff happen in the British film industry. Some of them are good people, but that they don't tend to have those reference points. They don't tend to have a formal aesthetic principle of cinema.
No.
In the way that they probably do in other countries that have more of a cinematic, more cine-literate, like Poland and France and stuff.
Yeah.
Bresson and Tarkovsky, for me and you, are huge totemic reference points, and anyone who's serious about innovating in film has to have seen
Pay attention, not necessarily copy,
work.
but pay attention
to
what
not copy, because
was underlying them. And they, like we said earlier, they both wrote manifestos. They both staked their position very clearly. Their cards were on the table filmically. And
they were true practitioners.
And I think what you get with this film is an adherence to, like we saw with the manifesto, a very strict set of structural constraints, which he actually breaks more than one of them in this film, in Enys Men. As Lars von Trier did with Dogma, like there's really only one Dogma film, if you want to put it that way. And I think you get the sense that with this film, it's hard to talk about it without contextualizing through bait, but I will try. With this film, what you get is a sense that what has been evacuated from the film is its context.
Yeah.
The woman, we know nothing about the woman. We know nothing about her relationship to the daughter. We know nothing about her relationship to the fisherman. We know nothing
yet we're
about
meant to care, and we're meant to find these kind of beautiful, admittedly beautiful flourishes of editing and cinematography. We're meant to find them meaningful without being given a reason to find them meaningful.
The form is unable to bootstrap the context.
Whereas in Bay, it's all meaningful, and it's hugely powerful.
100%. Bay, Bronco's house even, it bootstraps itself. That's what it's doing. The form is speaking to the content. And it's like, he's not set out to make a 90-minute experimental film. He's made a 90-minute narrative film that ransacks, as George put it, the kind of cupboard of the costume cupboard of experimental film. And I think for me, my feeling was that these deranged kind of foreshadowings, these jump cuts, these smash cuts, the use of crash zooms, the use of kind of crash pans and stuff like that, borrowed heavily from the language of a kind of naive 70s British English cinema. And they were never really explained. I didn't feel like the form was justifying anything. I didn't feel like we were given a paranormal without a normal, is the best way I can put it. We were given this kind of unusual ghostly haunting that was unfolding somewhere. And as you said earlier, if you're going to have a ghost story, you need the ghost story to invade a normalcy. The ghost needs to haunt a normal house. I
mean, that's what's so amazing about Bait, is that Bait is a ghost story, but it's a ghost story that uses ghostliness as a metaphor.
Yeah, not a literal
the
ghost.
Character of Martin is living. I mean, it's debatable who's the ghost in Bait. There is a whole industry that evaporates in winter.
The fishing industry, the tourism industry.
Tourism industry.
Actually, wait. Should we, before we talk about Bait, Do you want to play?
Yeah, I want to. We're talking about context.
So basically, we were at Wrocław. We were at Nory Horizonti Film Festival after the screening of Enys Men. Ralph asked a question, and it was answered very well, I think, fairly by Mark Jenkin. But yeah, do you want to roll the tape? say.
I was just wondering, in comparison with your first film, Bait, which is sort of very rich with political and psychological context, I was wondering why you chose to make so many elements of the background in the context of the film so oblique and unclear until things emerged gradually.
I don't think I thought about it particularly. I think probably Bait is more of an anomaly in the way that I write.
Damn it.
And this script is much more in keeping with the way that I think and the way I write about film. I'm really not. I'm not too. Well, you probably noticed. I'm not too preoccupied about backstory.
I don't think that's true though.
I used to be.
Wait, was that the end of the clip? Oh yeah, because then the Polish translator has to answer it. Yes, and then Mary Woodvine answers the question as well, and she says, I can recap it fairly faithfully.
Go for it.
She says, oftentimes Mark wouldn't tell me what my character was feeling, and he would just tell me what to do, and wouldn't tell me what to do, or like what the reason was for it. Yeah, and he was like, sometimes I knew, and sometimes I didn't know. Like Mark Jenkin was like, sometimes I knew why I was telling her what to do and I didn't tell her, and sometimes I didn't know and I was just telling her something. Yeah. And I was like, this is the thing about artists, let me be broad and bold here. The thing about artists is they're very superstitious people. I am an artist, I make films, I direct films, and I have certain superstitions. But I'm aware that some of the rules I have about my own films, even just stuff to do with like not wanting to watch my films after I've made them, it's all kind of bullshit. You make up these rules that you think are generative of the magic that helps you make the thing that you think is good,
as evidenced by his manifesto.
Exactly. But very often these rules or these like obsessive principles, they give you superstitiously they give you the feeling that you're about, because they're because everyone you admire has these superstitions too. They give you that sort of drive to feel like, that you're doing something for a reason all the time. Ironically, one of his principles here is not giving the actors a reason. I think when you work with actors in general, they tend to ask you why the fuck their character is doing what they're doing. It's a lot easier when you're acting if you know a little bit about the character. It just is. It's just common sense. It's the thing you would think first that the actor would want to know something.
In a collaborative
Exactly.
Yep.
Just a bit you don't have to tell them everything, and sometimes it's good to have a little bit of moment of ambiguity. There are directors like Bresson. Now, the thing about Bresson, I've read notes on a cinematograph. It's extraordinary. Bresson's films are extraordinary. Bresson literally was doing almost like Wallace and Gromit style, like stop motion with these actors. He called them models. He
was completely antagonistic to the idea of an actor.
Exactly. He wouldn't treat them as actors. They weren't actors, fair enough. And none of them, they weren't TikTokers. Yeah. They didn't know what they looked like on camera even. There wasn't CCTV. They were really unself-conscious individuals that he'd found. And we may never be able to get to that point with directing.
Interesting point.
We may be able to create beautiful other things, but
we need to find like a kind of shut-in in Mongolia.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just go to fucking Vanuatu and just like ask these people to pretend to like a fan forged money or something.
It's funny, like, being fighting.
Yeah, but you can't this kind of moment of unself-consciousness, of not having when you point a camera at someone and they just go like, oh my god, I'm on camera. I've got to do something. Like I was with my girlfriend the other night, and she was like, and we tried to make a film with each other. And like as soon as I put the camera, no shade to her, that's not what she's trying to do in life. But like I put the camera on her, and she like started like acting. She started like trying to do expressions, trying to like express things in a way that was totally unlike how she would be in real life. It was bad acting in the way that we would understand.
Well, you would see it with like when you look at kind of digitized film. Actually, I think it's really interesting. I have this kind of bait, as it were, taste for watching interpolated early film footage, like kind of documentary film footage from the 1890s and early 1900s that's been interpolated so it moves smoothly like normal film. It's been colorized. I find it very interesting. And you often get films shot in Sheffield or Leeds or London. And there's an attitude people have in front of the camera, which is they obviously don't perform because it's an alien concept, and they look at the camera and they regard it. And they look down the camera. To them, it's not something to fear because they have no concept of themselves being projected on a screen.
Exactly.
And I think there's an innocence and a naivety there, which I think Bresson was trying to capture, an anxiety of naivety in a way. And which Mark Jenkin can't create now because he's working with Mary Woodburn, who is an actor, professional actor. You know, he's working with a professional crew.
And you're essentially just messing her around. I mean, I don't like...
I mean, she's his wife, so we don't really know what their
vibe together
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's his wife, right?
That makes sense. Makes sense.
Don't fact check that.
Yeah, we should fact check that. Maybe, I don't know. They obviously work together loads. She's in on everything. And they seem very jovial about it all, but I could sort of sense that this was... It worked in Bait. So here's the thing. So like the acting in Bait is very wooden, but it works. Actually, the acting in Bresson is kind of, in quotes, wooden in a certain sense.
Yeah, extremely.
And the woodenness is blank enough that you, as a viewer, are able to project. So let's talk about why Bresson is so brilliant, because he is brilliant, and it's good to be influenced by Bresson because he's fantastic. But there can be, when you are influenced by a totemic figure, there can be misunderstandings.
Well, Bresson has quite a natural camera. The famous thing about Bresson are his hands, his gestures. I wrote about them recently. They signify towards a kind of desiring lack. You know, hands reach out towards other hands. Hands are pulled away. Hands nervously touch bodies. And there's an attentiveness and a studiousness to how Bresson films the bodies of these naive filmmakers. Mark Jenkin is working with professional actors. I think one thing I want to kind of like, before we kind of delve fully into the tensions between Bait and Enys Men, is that we do need to contextualize some of the problems I had with Enys Men in its visual borrowings from the 70s and earlier. I mean, we can delay this conversation till later, but it is the kind of cul-de-sac that English filmmaking finds itself in, which is a nostalgism. Yes, it's not kitchen sink drama, and the problem with British film is it's either in the kitchen sink or it's out in Stonehenge. Those are the only two places it can be, right? It has to be kind of a pagan, nostalgic, weird, or it needs to be in the kitchen sink and be about,
to be like real,
nil by mouth,
like
or
even like the kind of up and coming
Bentley.
like British voice in cinema, according to some tastemakers, is this this girl Io Ienke. I'm probably saying her name wrong, but she just does these completely tedious films about people on council estates, kind of becoming politically conscious or whatever.
Yeah, it's about somebody who's escaping a context. This person is worthy of being saved. From
it's terrible because like my politics are not a million miles away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very
that's not what I want art to do.
It's very social mobility. It's Blairist social mobility embodied, enacted in filming. But I think the problem here is you've got Jenkin, who is riffing often very, very blatantly of Nicholas Roeg. Don't Look Now. The red. She basically every day she wears a red, bright red rain mark. Come on, that is Nicholas Roeg. There are references. Come on. There are references to Children of the Stones. There are references with its pans and crash zooms. It's kind of naive zooms to the Blood and Satan's Claw, like Haggers, the Philip Haggers film, Peter Haggers film. Sorry. And there's a lot of, in British filmmaking, there's branches here. We can trace these branches. And you've got Hammer horror, which was a particular moment in the post-war era when, Ealing comedies and then Hammer evolved a particular kind of campy, and then obviously I suppose kind of erotic dramas as well. And there was a particular moment then, and the successor to that under, I guess, the 70s and Thatcher, under Heath and Thatcher and whatever, you had... this emergence of a what was called folk horror, and this film plays into the tropes of folk horror, but what it does, it doesn't really
like the Wicker Man.
Wicker Man, like I said, Don't Look Now, Blood on Satan's Claw, Witchfinder General, all these films, and it is basically an homage to those films. But
Pender's Fen,
which is a play for today. Yeah. And you've got all these films that, like I said, British filmmaking is either in the kitchen sink or it's in Stonehenge. It either has to be about real gritty problems, social problems, or it needs to be about this kind of undefinable strangeness, which is an escape from suburban normality, because we've never had it so good, you could say, right? So what is the bubbling? It's like the very banal interpretation of what Lynch does for American suburbia.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's something eerie underneath all of this, but where Lynch brings great joviality and joy to it, and creates a genuine strangeness. I think a lot of English filmmaking, like Ben Wheatley, just says, what if a guy's in a field but it's weird, or what if there's a tree but it's haunted? It's very that. And my problem with that is that spoke to insubstantial, but that at the time those films projected a particular imaginary in the political, cultural context of Britain at that time. I don't understand the value or point of making a film like that now. It's only an homage. Why are you making an homage? You've made an amazing film, Bait. Build on that. You're not building on it. You've extracted everything that was good about Bait, which we can talk about now, which was its political and social context. You vacuum those things out, and all you're left with is formal brilliance, sure, but those things don't help to support any kind of content. I mean, maybe you want to talk about why Bait was good, in that sense. Maybe that's a good point of transition. I mean,
Bait was a bit like when Corbyn did Better Than Expected in 2017. There was like a real feeling like...
Yes, we can.
This real feeling of like, actually, if you actually show people... Because Bait did, for context, financially, Bait did very well compared to what people thought it would do. Like a debut film by an unknown director about fucking Cornwall.
An experimental film.
Experimental, basically. Yeah. It made like $500,000 or something. It was like huge. And Mark Kermode said it. Mark Kermode, one of the most influential film critic, unfortunately.
The most influential film critic.
He's
Britain. Al Kahir.
Yeah. Sadly, regrettably. But he liked it, and he was right to like it. And he said it was the best film of the year, and he championed it. You can't ask for more than that. Like, it was a very popular film. And justifiably so, and it was a moment, of like, okay, the people are ready for like something that's formally interesting, something experimental. That's a very exciting proposition, and not only that, it touched on politics, but it didn't proselytize. It wasn't dogmatic. It was a very the engagement with politics was primarily like emotional.
Do you want to explain for those who haven't seen it, like the kind of what the tension was?
So Bait. So the thing about Cornwall, is a lot of people, a lot of the fucking houses are owned by people who live in London.
Down from Londoners.
They're like quite rich people who just buy a place in Cornwall because it's got a bit of atmosphere. It's got an unusual county. It's got a bit of character to it. There's lots of coastal bits, because the shape of Cornwall is like very thin,
it's a long peninsula.
So there's lots of coastal land, and essentially it's a big thing. Second homes in Cornwall are a big thing, because it's a nice place to go for the summer, but it's not really a nice place to be the rest of the year. Cornwall used to be a big mining area. It's not anymore.
Mining and fishing.
Yeah. The main character in Bait, Martin, is a fisherman. He doesn't really have enough money to have his own boat. His brother, who used to be part of a family of fishermen, his brother is just caved and become a kind of tourist boat person.
He's using their father's dead. They're using his father's boat to take day trippers out for coastal tours,
stag nights and stuff. Yeah. So it's very déclassé. It's very just tasteless, the sort of stuff he does. And there's a nobleness to the protagonist in Bait that he continues to stick to Cornwall's industry of fishing. There's a lot of coastal land, and he goes out there with these pots, they're called, which are sort of like
well, you're missing you've skipped a beat. So what he's doing is he's basically doing a kind of tidal fishing netting, where he's laying a net out on the beach because he hasn't got a boat. And a lot of people point out the kind of absurdity of this, because there's multiple times where Cornish people in the film say to him, but like, you haven't got a boat though. So he's kind of fishing, and he catches maybe 3 or 4 fish, and he wakes up at dawn. And
he works extremely hard for very little reward,
basically.
If he could afford a boat, and there's this very tense, I won't spoil it, but like there's like this tin of money on his shelf, where on his window, which I always find really stressful.
Trustful.
So it's the rural area.
But his door's also unlocked.
Insane. But he has these sort of £20, £5, £10 notes kind of stuffed in this tin, and it's labelled boat, and it's his little savings account for when he's able to buy a boat. Which would help him fish more profitably. But ultimately, there's this pub that is kind of open to the tourist industry. There is this family, the mother of whom is Mary Woodvine, who's in the other films, and they're beautifully done kind of Waitrose family, very kind of upper middle class.
Taste the difference.
They've
family.
bought various properties along this street, including his old family home, which he's sold to them, and he kind of has a, he has a I guess he has a relationship with them, in that it used to be his house, and he comes up now and again, and he's also parked in front of there, and his car gets clamped. They do these very irritating, vicious middle class things of like
curtain twitching,
of like being friendly but then calling the cops on him. Like weird stuff.
You said a point earlier, which is that this is a ghost film in a way, and you said he is a ghost. He is an obsolete fragment of the past that's persisting into the present, and he also turns up in the house. He often knocks on their door and just kind of loiters, and he's there 'cause he's not really let go of his family home. This is presumably where he was brought up with his brother. He sold the house, like in their defense, like he shouldn't really be hanging around.
You do wonder why he's there, but it's poetically necessary. But there is, and you side with him because he is he never harms anyone in the film. He's full of rage, but he kind of and other people act violently on his behalf, but he's quite beleaguered. He's a beautiful character in that way, that he's beleaguered and harangued, but he suffers, but he sort of kind of takes it on the chin nobly, like the sort of anyway. So his nephew has a romantic tryst with the daughter of this middle class family, which is the source of ever ramping tension in the film. Won't spoil the plot, but basically the film draws on a very clear and obvious set of romantic and financial status tensions to reach its climax, which is beautifully executed via extraordinary parallel editing and a very
absolutely brilliant silent editing,
and very like immersive textured film that gives you a real sense of all the objects that are being touched and moved. In this sense, let's talk about Bresson. All of Bresson's films are basically about material struggles of some sort.
No, material struggles that are spiritual struggles.
Sometimes spiritual struggles.
A man escapes, for example. It's a man who is who's honed his entire will, his entire reason to exist is based through material objects. Him slowly creating the rope and the digging out the lock on his door. His will has been entirely bent to escape. To resisting the authority that's imprisoned him in a cunty priest.
Tire of a cunty priest.
You've got somebody whose spiritual struggle is expressed through bread and wine, and the kind of bleak functional materiality of being a provincial priest in France. Like pickpocket is the desiring towards the objects in people's pockets. Like he's very deft at establishing the metaphorical
as well about money.
Yeah, the kind of metaphorical and spiritual significance of objects. And I think Jenkins does it really well. You said with this match cutting is really good, and this parallel editing. You know, there's an amazing scene, which in anyone else's hands might feel a bit blatant, but it's so nice. You know, there's a scene where the middle class family are unpacking their Waitrose shopping of like posh cheese and wine and sparkling wine. Meanwhile, you see it cuts between him sorting out the rope and the net and the lobster pots and things like that.
And then the daughter and the nephew grating cheese and making quite a simple pasta. I mean, the way in which food and fish and texture, lobster at one point, you know, the way in which dining kind of
signifies class
and signifies contrast and signifies like power. You know, there's one point at which like you know, a lobster is stolen from the fisherman, and this creates huge tension. I mean, it is an extraordinary melding of form and content, and that's what was so exciting about Bait.
Absolutely,
and why we were giddy in our seats as we awaited the screening of Enys Men.
It is one of the most Eisensteinian films in terms of Eisenstein's montage, theory of montage. Like, because the thing with Eisenstein, I think we've talked about this before, is that Eisenstein was a great theorist of montage who never put into practice anything that he wrote down. Like maybe Strike, sort of to an extent, kind of realised his ambitions for what montage could be, but I don't think he ever really had a chance to actualise montage in the way that he envisaged it.
Mark Jenkin does.
Mark Jenkin kind of does. He kind of that match cutting, which is simple yet very vocal. It is incredibly powerful. It's deeply Eisensteinian. His shot choice, his framing, because he's working with quite a tight frame with a quite shallow focus. And I think, and I also remember that he's shooting on Bolex. So part of the clip of the film is that with a hand cranked film, you've got 28 seconds per shot. To play with. So it kind of lends it already this quite clippy jump cutting, but it's great because
add to that all the dialogue is recorded afterwards. So there's this sense of estrangement.
He says something very alienation effect.
Yeah, he said something very beautiful in the interview about how the way that even though you don't have a record of how the dialogue is spoken, just from the way the lips move, there's a lot of the performance is kind of crystallized in the visual representation of someone talking.
You come not to
so there's not very much bandwidth in terms of how much you can change it in the ADR.
Yeah,
which I thought was very interesting.
You don't really rely so much on what's being said as the movement and blocking of bodies and how they interact with objects. And there's the thing about Bait is it's got extraordinary narrative tension that ramps up through. There's a lot of foreshadowing. Yeah, there's a lot of red herrings in the foreshadowing as well. There's certain things in the foreshadowing which aren't foreshadowed. Very important narrative moments that aren't foreshadowed, which you feel they should be.
I would say some of the foreshadowing in Bait is annoying and unnecessary.
Okay.
And I feel that Enys Men draws heavily on all the things that
it does it in a very dumb way.
The very few things that don't work about Bait are like just basically the entirety of Enys Men.
Yeah. Because the foreshadowing there.
I feel like if Mark Jenkin has listened to this, I don't know, it's quite harsh what we're saying, but it's true. I mean, it's
only because we like Bait.
It's only because we want you to make a fantastic film, and we know you can make another film.
It's not Michael Mann has just made Heat 2, so you can make Bait 2.
Look, like he's not Bresson level.
No one is.
Very few people are. He would be the first to say that, but he is a very substantial talent. And let's
what he needs is a context, and I think what was evacuated, like we said, from Enys Men was the context. It was like a reason to care or understand about this woman and why she was on this island.
But the issue is most British films, because he made this. The thing about if you look at the British film industry, if you look at the paths through which people are able to make films through funding from the industry, because he wasn't, I think, as far as I understand it, he basically just kind of scrimped and saved and managed to
he
make...
kickstarted
he did
Bronco's
a Kickstarter,
house.
He managed to
yep.
slowly build up a reputation
Respect for that.
and managed to make a feature film. I'm sure many people didn't imagine it would happen. And he managed to break out, having worked for 20 years towards this film. He managed to cultivate a style and make... And that was what was so impressive about it. But it was like... It was kind of no thanks to the tastemakers of Creative England or whatever, you know, whoever
Piece of Ace,
the film hubs that exist, you know,
Yeah.
that try and fund, you know, the BFI. Now it used to be the UK Film Council, now it's the BFI. But the people who kind of make film happen, they're quite conventional people, and they're extremely... I've had conversations with these. I've gone to presentations as I sort of dip my toe in this world. They're extremely suspicious of anyone who thinks they're an artist. They're extremely suspicious because they basically know, and somewhat accurately, they basically know that it's just that you're on a hiding to nothing if you give a lump of money to someone who thinks they're the next Bresson.
Right.
Because they will just make some...
Because they want
they will make some...
ROI, don't they? They want a return on their investment.
Exactly. This person will make just pretentious bullshit. And there isn't much money available because the arts has been cut by the Tories. So we can't live in this kind of Channel 4 1980s, 1970s...
Play for today.
Yeah,
vibe,
we can't have this laissez-faire of just throwing... We should live in that world
That's
where you just fund loads of things that will be shit, and just occasionally some genius like someone will create Festin or something, you know, but essentially.
But Bait could have been
essentially the approach to... I mean, Bait was our Festin basically, because it came out of Manifesto. It was a very vital and stylistically distinctive realised project, and it was fantastic, and it looked and felt different.
But even I think the thing is, there's a pattern here, because Bronco's house, which we mentioned earlier, this featurette, kind of was a proving ground for the formal considerations that Jenkins was adopting in Bait. What he did between Bronco's house and Bait was to kind of slough off those things that didn't work, and I think they were so my way of seeing it was, in Bronco's house he arranges his actors toward the camera, whereas in Bait he frames his camera around the bodies of his actors. It's inverted, so the camera is reacting to the world rather than people reacting towards the camera. So you get a lot of, in Bronco's house, you get a lot of harmoniously balancing of two people standing in a field, one on the left, one on the right. It's almost, you know, Wes Andersonian is the best way to put it.
Tragically.
But you get these kind of things. You get a lot of scenes where people break the fourth wall and look at the camera and talk to the camera, or look directly down the lens of the camera. He got rid of those things, and so he had a very, Bronco's house is a much more experimental film. I'm doing speech quotes there, scare quotes. What he added to Bronco's house was a naturalistic setting, but he still gave himself space to exaggerate. Like we said, this Waitrose family are kind of mannequins in a way. They're
caricatures. They're grotesque.
They're grotesque caricatures.
But the people like that exist, definitely.
Yeah, they absolutely exist. I mean, the father is, I think, brilliantly realised in a way, because he's this odious, and I've met people like him, and I've met a lot of them in...
Lycra wearing cunt.
Lycra wearing cunts. But I've met a lot of them in second home places. You know, my family live in Suffolk. And you get a lot of those people in the kind of posh townlets of Suffolk. You know, they love to talk about their caps, by which I mean cappuccinos, and their posh wines, and they wear their chinos and their gilets and stuff, and they love to, maybe they've got a little boat that they go down the River Deben on. And I think you get these people, and it's a great caricature. So he's able to use exaggeration and caricature. That's not the problem. The problem is with Enys Men is the evacuation of context from it, and it didn't need much. It just needed a little bit of context. It needed it was actually less experimental than Bait.
It was,
because the match cutting was gone. The really amazing match cutting and the parallel editing that you saw in Bait was gone. And it was like, for me, that was
it was just foreshadowing. It was foreshadowing for something that never really happens.
Yeah,
it's just louder foreshadowing happens.
Because there was no tension, because it's implied that it's kind of already happened.
God, it was so shit, man.
There's a moment.
So disappointing.
There's a moment where there's a moment where she opens the door, and there's a lot of narrative significance has been placed on this kind of stone obelisk thing. And it's at the end, when she opens her front door, it's on the horizon. She opens her front door, and it's there on a doorstep, this obelisk, and it's like, oh, fucking hell. It's so fucking Garth Marenghi. There's actually a great line in Garth Marenghi where when they do the piece to cameras, he's like, I know writers who use subtext and they're cowards. And I think that's one of the cases where it's like subtext is great sometimes because you don't need to literalize. Like the stone doesn't need to appear on your front doorstep. It's enough for the stone to be imbued with her projections of angst and fear. And I think we talked a lot in kind of WhatsApp whatever about the kind of obvious bait as it were stuff about Mark Fisher and about the slow cancellation of future and about hauntology, and this is a very hauntological film in the sense it is trapped within a closed loop retromaniac ransacking of the past that is unable to escape that trajectory, which is why it has to borrow so heavily on Nicholas Roeg. It's why it has to borrow so heavily on the Children of the Stones. It's why it has to borrow so heavily from Haggers and Wicker Man and all these other references, and it isn't able to make its own claim and stake on filmmaking.
So here's the thing with British filmmaking.
Golf King.
And earlier I compared it to British food. Because the most popular British dish is like chicken tikka masala or something.
So they say. Yeah.
So they say. And then obviously we have these things like beef Wellington and Yorkshire pudding and fish and chips, which are like fine, but they're a bit bland. But they're nice. But you wouldn't want to. We're glad that we eat other things. Like
a man cannot live alone. On
like mostly people eat like pasta, which is Italian. Whatever. Right? Whereas when you go to like Poland, for instance, which we went to recently, like they eat Polish food by and large, and it's a distinctive cuisine. It's not for everyone, but it's for Polish people. It works. It's nice. I mean, I like Polish food.
I don't know if that's strictly true. There were a lot of plenty of burger joints and shit, but to an extent,
but like
you're true.
Like literally,
show
me a British restaurant. Within a mile ratio.
There's one
here.
St. John.
Yeah, there's one. Right.
There's 3 St. Johns.
Go to a trendy area of Wrocław and find me a Polish restaurant. They're everywhere.
Yeah, okay.
They have like a substantial cuisine that you.
And I only literally all I could think of was St. John's.
Yeah, exactly.
Noble Rock.
But that is, it's fine. We British music in the 20th century and 21st century has been very influential globally and very vibrant. Lots of genres have been created in Britain, But film-wise, up and coming filmmakers in Britain have not had much to look up to be fair.
No.
And a lot of the things that have emerged from Britain have either in the mainstream people like Chris Nolan, Ridley Scott, Sam Mendes, who've gone absconded to Hollywood, or kind of very European influenced directors who've absconded to Europe.
Can I make a claim, which is the most interesting filmmaking in the UK in the last 30 years or maybe 20 years has been done on television by Chris Morris.
Well, yeah, true.
Jam. I mean, you've got there is a tradition of, and even Garth
British
Marenghi,
TV, which has a strong connection to theatre, has been often more interesting than cinema. I mean, Alan Clark, who's my favourite English director, was definitely drawing on TV, working in TV and drawing on theatre to a large extent.
But you've also, I think,
even though cinematically he was inventive.
Yes. Sorry, carry on your thought. I just wanted to interject.
Well, just that I think that it personally disappointing to me as a filmmaker that there isn't very much to refer to in the. I mean, I'm not a nationalist in general, but like I think it's important that someone from where you're from has done something that you admire in your field.
Absolutely.
And I think in France it's much easier.
That's why
to
Peter
feel
Brook
that.
is very exciting.
Yeah.
But obviously, like that's done and dusted.
In theatre, yeah.
I mean, but no, in film like Tell Me Lies. I mean, Tell Me Lies is the most European film that's been ever made in Britain. I would say.
But that's the thing. The good British filmmakers are often drawn on Europe. I mean, Peter Strickland, I have to say, is a very tragic case in this regard. I was extremely excited, similar to how I was excited by Bay. I was extremely excited by Katalin Varga, his debut. But of course, it was a European film. It was very heavily influenced by European art house cinema. Bergman and so forth. And it was filmed in Romania. And it was not in English, and it had nothing to do with where he's from. And then he went. His second film was it was about an Englishman going to a sound studio, a giallo sound studio in Italy. Then he made Duke of Burgundy. Like he's just flagrantly just like shagging Europe and
even
not
then you've
facing
got an example
where
that
he's from.
He was dragging the British sensibility, the hauntological sensibility with him with Barabian Sound Studio, because he was making a nostalgic film about Dario Argento effectively in Italy. It's like, don't bring your shit and your baggage, your British baggage to Italy. Like, they've got a fine filmmaking tradition on their own.
But this is the thing with the film industry.
Toby Jones is great in it, obviously, but
on a very practical level, like, if you try and make a film with like public funds in this country, you will, you can't be a British Bresson wouldn't get through this system, is what I'm saying. But also, a lot of people might think they're a British Bresson, and they do need to be told by these these tastemakers. Well, I have one anecdote from someone who's quite a veteran of the British film industry, a friend of mine. I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this anecdote. Was that she said, so the film, there's this tastemaker person asked her who her biggest influence was, and she said Chantal Akerman, and she was like Chantal. This was around the time of Big Brother.
Well, they said that.
The tastemaker, the BFI tastemaker she was talking to, was like, Chantal.
That's so good.
They don't know about like fantastic filmmakers.
Agnes.
Agnes
Varda.
They're on a financial risk thing, right? They would rather make a completely generic film about someone, like a gay Muslim who's having trouble being a gay Muslim in Bradford. They'd rather just commission 100 films about how it's difficult to be gay in Muslim than they would allow the next Bresson to bloom.
We said earlier, and I think this is might be an unpopular opinion or whatever, but I think we abhor films about middle class and upper class experience in the UK. Joanna Hogg is a rare exception to that. And long may she carry on making films about the upper middle classes. And I'm not saying that because I feel like they're underrepresented, so far as I feel like we are again locked into the kitchen sink. Well,
we need to face up to the kind
now the problem is we're locked in. We're in three places. We're caught between the kitchen sink, Stonehenge, and a detention centre in Dover. And those are the three places that British film triangulates between. And I think the problem there is that we end up making films that only reflect our reality. And if they can't reflect our reality, then they have to do a Mark Jenkin, Enys Men, and just do something completely quirky and batshit, which is like,
that's like the only escape from
it's
realism.
like one of those nice ghost stories you used to tell when you're younger. Those films, those nice kind of films when we were younger.
And we're millennials. We don't really have a connection to that. We weren't young when where The Wicker Man came out. We weren't born.
We watch it in a kind of irony. And the thing is, we've kind of given up, as it were, on British filmmaking. And it is, when we go to places like Wrocław and watch new, exciting, genuinely diverse cinema from other cultures and countries. Take somewhere like Verisathical, right? Verisathical makes films about folk culture and about ritual and about prehistory and about traditions, local traditions. And he talks about the difficulty of getting along and getting by. He makes films about hotel orderlies and people who sell fish, literally in his earliest films. He does that, but he is able to create a kind of a sublime, meaningful, rich formally experimental cinema out of that, which can sustain itself film after film after film. Lav Diaz does the same. You know, obviously Lav Diaz isn't everyone's cup of tea, because his films are about 10 hours long. But I love him personally. But again, you've got films that speak to their national context. You know, Lav Diaz only makes films about his
Tar in Hungary as well.
Bellatar. They all make films about the trajectory of their nation.
Yeah.
But they're not fucking boring and dismal. They are interesting. You know, they are formally invigorating. They're spiritually ravishing. Why can't film be that? I think this stuff is in Mark Jenkin, because in Bronco's house there's a scene where the girl there's a scene where a plate drags across the table, and a very direct reference to Stalker.
Yeah.
But I think that the thing. So he has got a bit of a tendency to ransack. What I'd really like to see him do with a future film is to recontextualize his formal method and to kind of unhinge himself a bit and get easy and free with it. And kind of you don't have to pay homage to, this isn't North Korea. We don't have to go and bow before a statue. You can make a film that doesn't have to pay heed. It's not like Alice Lowe making Prevenge. All these films that just have to refer back to a particular imaginary of British psyche. It's just make your shit, make it interesting. Escape the vampire castle.
Don't do English politics of the boring middle-aged white man. Not that we're accusing Mark Jenkin of doing that.
No, we're really not. But I do want to say, obviously, I still think that Bait is one of the most exciting, certainly the most exciting Cornish film, but definitely the most exciting.
I mean, I've never watched another Cornish film apart from his shorts.
But one of the most exciting British films made in recent years.
Absolutely.
It
was a very exciting moment. And it probably a lot of our harshness about Enys Men is merely a result of our extremely high expectations off the back of Bait.
Our great expectations, you might say.
Exactly. And we if the dear boy is listening, we wish him no ill will, and we merely mean this as an encouragement to improve and to learn from mistakes. And Enys Men was a mistake. It's very clearly an unpleasant film to watch, and I will not be watching it again.
I will be asking for my what was it, like £2.50 refund from New Horizons?
Oh yeah, very cheap cinema tickets.
Very cheap cinema tickets. So there's that. There is that.
So I couldn't say it wasn't
okay.
Good value.
So I think how long have we done? We've done our hour.
We've done an hour. I think we had, because he's British, because it's been weighing on our mind heavy. We had to go long on this. All is not lost. Things like Bait can be created in this world. Bronco's house, I feel like, just failed, but on the basis of the main actor being a bit boring and dead.
Oh, it was a bit dense.
Yeah.
But it was.
But the other actors were amazing.
The other actors were amazing. Vogt, I can't remember her name. The girl in it, Sophie Vogt.
She was paying.
She's really paying.
Anyway,
actually.
enough about that.
But I think the actually the thing I wanted to say earlier is all his films are ghost films, because all of his films are about a foreigner, as it were, an outsider intruding on a situation or a scene. In Bronco's house, it's the foreigner is this roving Iago-like guy who turns up and ends up shagging Bronco's bird and ends up kind of undermining them and buying the property that they want to settle into so they can raise a child. In Bait, the intruder, it was really good. And in Bait, the intruder was the family, the kind of down from London family. In Enys Men, the intruder wasn't there. And I think the intruder element is missing. It was abstracted.
See the face of the intruder. It's true. And therefore there wasn't a substantial conflict to engage with. No. And ultimately, without wishing to be too doctrinaire or too conventional, a good film that lasts 90 minutes and claims to have a narrative must have a central, tangible conflict.
Yes.
On that note,
what are we doing next? Because I think we went through a period where we allowed MoveTube to drift.
It was like Glastonbury. We let the soil
regrow. And I think we're reinvigorated.
Yeah, I'm happy to review more films. And there are certain filmmakers I think we need to talk about that we haven't talked about.
I think we should do. I would like to do Assayas. And
maybe let's cover Irma Vep.
And we should also do Agnieszka Holland.
And Agnieszka Holland, Polish director that is very interesting.
Really fell in love with.
We saw a lot of her work at New Horizons.
So there will be more MoonTube coming for.
There will be pod, and message us, contact us with your thoughts about the pod and your thoughts about what we're saying. We're all open to discussion, and we're making stuff as well.
Yeah, there's a film that's in the works.
There'll be some signs of that.
And we will no doubt use this substantial platform to promote that film, which will make none of the errors that Mark Jenkin.
I mean, that's the great thing.
Geniuses.
The transition from critique to creation
for all those people that
is a very vulnerable place. The Kaye class did it. Class of Kaye, 1959. But yes, it's hard. It's
not
hard.
The Kanye class.
I don't think it's something we should need to say every time we review a film because it's obvious. But it is hard to make a film.
It is really hard.
And very often, you end up making sacrifices in the moment, and having inflexibility, psychological inflexibilities, as a result of being in a high pressure situation that are then hard to defend after the fact. And that's why, filmmaking requires a huge amount of sort of psychological strength in order to hold certain aesthetic principles while also managing, delegating to a large crew of people.
I mean, the real test would be subjecting our own filmmaking to the grunting demands of our listeners. But I don't think we will do that.
We will do that at some point, in some form. I'm not sure how that would happen, but I would love my film to be reviewed by some rambunctious young bros in Hackney Wick. I would say certainly.
I mean, this is the problem because you realise all the critique you have is you may ultimately make the film that you want to make. That you're not really listening to other people. The last film I finished is 52 minutes of slowly evolving texture and field recording. It has no narrative tension. It has no.
But that will be that will be fairly judged on
its own merits as an experimental film. Yeah.
I think our beef with Enys Men was that it was neither a transcendent experimental film nor a coherent narrative, and it borrowed the worst aspects of both. Both forms, both tendencies. On that note,
we're done.
Take care, everyone. Be well. Bye bye.